Welcome to HumanFuel, a podcast that explores the human art of thriving. Join two psychologists as they unpack the themes of well-being, effectiveness, and transformation for a more productive, fuller, and happier life.
Okay, this is the pilot episode of HumanFuel. If you don't know where you are going, any road could take you there. This is a quote from Alice in Wonderland. And I used to use this quote quite a lot back in the day when I used to do management training, and this was the start of our mastery workshops. And I think today is a good day to start off and kick off our season 1 of HumanFuel podcast with that topic. The quote invites reflection on the importance of setting goals and understanding one's desires while acknowledging the freedom and the potential that comes with not being tied to a specific destination. And that is what we are talking about on our pilot episode. Molweni, hi, hello, I am Dr. Ntetha, a psychologist, multi-dimensional healer, the Doctor of Joy, and your host of the HumanFuel Podcast, where two psychologists talk about well-being, effectiveness, and thriving. And I'm not alone. I'm with my co-host, Spencer.
Hey, Joy. So good to be here. I'm a psychologist and an integral coach.
Yeah, and I guess we're on this mission of expanding our dialogue on the everyday conversations we've been having on just well-being and thriving holistically in our lives. And that's sort of the guiding points for this season. So if you don't know where you are going, any road could take you there. Right? And when I think about the statement now, 15 years after I started using it, I've seen how the emphasis of what it means have shifted for me from initially being about the importance of having your purpose all laid out and having these like very specific goals to reach and a timeline sort of to them, to now also looking at the importance of space and exploration and wandering, which is really where a lot of deepening of my purpose has come from initially. When you look at a purpose that you can throw at a life, Spencer, what comes up for you?
So, I mean, the one thing that comes up for me is like a purpose feels like a big thing. Feels like quite a heavy thing. And then just kind of, I suppose, very abstractly, in my weird mind, imagine, this thing being thrown into a person.
Yeah.
Almost like a spirit that then animates that person. So in my head, it's almost like there's someone standing there that's not animated. They're kind of, not all that alive. And then it's almost like this visual of they get thrown this life, and suddenly they're animated and they become more full in their being. Yeah.
So then, from that point of view, would purpose be something that you're born with or you find along the way?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. For me, I mean, maybe the answer lies a little bit in the middle. It's you might be born with it, but it's not known to you from the beginning. And it seems like it's an emergent thing, at least it has been for me, where you go through your life and over time you become more clear on what's important to you and what resonates with you and what drives you, I guess.
Yeah. I kind of agree with that too. It almost is this unfolding that you do need to pay attention to some degree when it kind of sticks out. Sometimes it's recurring. Sometimes something happens maybe in your life and it just your life gathers new meaning that's just so fundamental to you. But I do like this sort of description from this book I've been reading lately called Sounding the Depths of Leadership. And that's where I first heard the quote or the statement, a purpose you can throw life at. right? Which kind of really reconfigured how I looked at purposeful living as something that gets emergent over time and gets animated within you, I think, as you also said. And basically, the author refers to this as a process of finding and committing to a cause that is so vital and compelling that it becomes the central axis around which one's life revolves. And when I think about this definition, I try to almost think about what I know for sure around my own purpose right now. And I don't know, let's start with you. Like, if you think about a purpose you could throw in a life, or something that entails purpose for you and that you know for sure, what would it be?
Yeah, I mean, to answer your question, I think I almost want to loop back to a word that you mentioned earlier, which was reoccurring. It's almost like as you go through your life, there are patterns or circumstances or events that seem to reoccur to reinforce what is important to you and what you draw into. And I think in my own life, as I've gotten older, I've maybe become more aware of what I naturally gravitate towards, as opposed to being in autopilot, what I naturally find my mind going to, what I find interesting. And for me, these are I mentioned to you before, Joy, there's this essential part of my purpose, I feel, is to work in a space of healing, where I'm involved in the healing of other people somehow. And that it's not necessarily, being like a clinical or counseling psychologist is a good example of how we think about healing. But healing happens in so many different shapes and forms, through conversations, through activities, through holding space for another human being. And so it's not necessarily refined to, your job, but there's an element of where, for me, that is purposeful, is to see other people in some way find healing and wholeness in their personal journeys, and to be part of that process with them. Yeah.
And I really resonate with that, because once you've had some sort of clarity about what resonates as healing for you, is definitely something that you can start thinking about in terms of holding space for others from a healing perspective as well. And I remember when we did talk about it, that mine also centered around healing as well, and more along the lines of collective healing or sharing of this healing effect, right? And by saying that, I'm really also quite keen to look at how people can start affecting their own health and well-being more directly than take this very, maybe sometimes disempowered view of healing, where you wait on the other person, whether it's a doctor, whether it's the hospital as a place separate to yourself, in terms of sort of healing. But I think I found a lot of joy or purpose in figuring out healing modalities for me, and then sharing that with the world, so that it's an empowered sort of process for people as well. Working with the main system, and not saying traditional medicine, for example, is now null and void.
Yes.
But where can we work together with it and meet it somewhere? And I like what you mentioned earlier around back to wholeness, because I think that's the definition of healing that I also resonate with, of like, it's a restoration back to wholeness, essentially, a way of life and a way of being, which I think a purpose also should encompass.
Yeah, and I think it's a point of convergence between us, and part of the desire to do a podcast like this is to start to have these conversations about what it means to live a more fulfilled and purposeful life.
Right.
And so, today feels like a very good kind of peg in the ground, and to start having those sorts of conversations.
Yeah. In fact, I do have a post-it here on the wall that says, as I move in my purpose, I allow others to move in theirs, and pointing to how it is a very collective, connected sort of concept that doesn't live in its vacuum, but it really creates that point of conversion amongst people in terms of what is fundamental to them, and you find that it's actually shared. And us even just coming together to have these conversations, there's this shared need or desire to come together into something that's meaningful and have the conversations we shared with others. Right. Yeah. And when you think about, things that you know for sure about your purpose, which is around healing, is there any sort of specific life experience you pinpoint that on, or is it something that sort of just randomly emerged?
Yeah, so I think it goes back to that reoccurring theme in the sense of not a single event, but perhaps multiple arrows pointing the same direction. I mean, I just think back, to the desire to study psychology, even back then, towards the end of high school. It was something deep inside of me that was pulled in that direction. But yeah, I think for me, it hasn't been a single thing. It's been over a period of time, a sense of just becoming more clear on what I'm really just keep getting drawn back to, like a gravitational pull towards something. I mean, I don't know does that resonate with you at all? Like a gravitational, like a sense of you being pulled in a direction.
Yeah.
And you can fight it and you can do something else, but it's always there.
Yeah.
It's part of who you are.
And sometimes it's not like all put together, but it's definitely something you can feel is pulling you. You might not have like a label to it, or maybe the closest label that we had growing up or starting to choose careers was psychologist, for example. And that's probably why we studied it. And I know, for example, at grade 10, I always knew that I wanted to be a doctor before even the psychology route. And then, after some time figuring out what medicine was like, I was like, I don't know about the blood thing and that whole life and death scenario. And I needed a bit more space, some more fluidity in understanding healing or what medicine might look like. And I kind of liked psychology in a way. But at the same time, I had this feeling that deep one-on-one psychology was a bit too much for me also when it came to healing. But after about 15 years or so of doing this, I'm finding myself just kind of 360 coming back to the space of the fundamentals of healing being like quite key in terms of my purpose. And this was even further deepened recently when I went through the tragic loss of my parents, my father, where I definitely looked at a life that he lived, and I found that it was a well-lived life in general when I really just zoomed out. And I started thinking about my own life. Like, would it have significance? What significance would it be? Would my creator be happy with me at the end of this sort of journey? And would I have felt that I fulfilled it in my deathbed, for example?
Yeah.
And so it really deepened the inquiry around what is fundamental to me and how can I actively really start having it live and breathe in my daily life. Because sometimes we might have these big purpose statements that don't show themselves in how we live every day.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where I wanted to take the conversation next, in terms of figuring out that, there is this thing called a purpose, or there is a reason that we're here. It's purposeful, and that how do we then want to fulfill it, and how do we want it to feel, how does it feel fulfilled when you live it every day, outside of it being like the statement, if that makes sense.
Yeah, especially when it feels like such a big thing.
Right.
So it's like, well, what do I do with this thing that's this almost like a burden on me? How do I practically, outwork it?
Yeah. So I'm going to carry on and share some 5 components of how purpose can find its way in our daily living. right? And this also comes from this book that I've been reading called Sounding the Depths of Leadership as well. It's going deeper into just being more purposeful in how we influence ourselves and those around us. And they mentioned firstly is that purpose then becomes an all-encompassing commitment, meaning there's somewhat of a total investment about sort of immersing yourself into something that significantly energizes every aspect of your life in general. So it becomes a certain devotion that you almost take with your life, that you're not just sort of floating about, but you're invested and devoted in this particular area that is fundamental to you, like how we had mentioned. The second part of it is that as a leader, purpose must influence the way in which you lead. And generally, in the context of leadership, this involves how leaders guide actions and decisions that they make, and how their purpose can inspire and mobilize others with clarity and commitment with those that resonate with their leadership. So in a way, purposeful leaders are authentic and they have a sense of integrity in what they say they will do, and there's an alignment between what they do and sort of their personal values. But I mean, how often do we see that out there? Like, what's your take on that, Spencer?
Not a lot. Although what I can say is there's something incredibly compelling about someone that you recognize as living,
I know,
pursuing their purpose, and living in their purpose. And it's funny, just the other day, I was having a conversation with a colleague about this. In fact, I can say who Majozi's a musician that now lives in the Cape. I knew him years ago. He worked for a bank. I'm not really sure what he did for the bank, but I know that he worked for a bank, and that's part of his journey and his story. And he played music on the side, and he released an EP, and it worked for him. The factors converged to allow him to leave his job and become a musician. And through that, he's been able to impact people's lives through his craft.
Yeah.
In quite a substantial way. But the thing that my mind keeps taking me back to is what would have happened if he hadn't? What would have happened if he hadn't followed, those things that were so core to him? He would still be working in the bank. And that's not to say there's anything wrong with working in the bank. But it's just vastly different. And you could say that he would have missed his calling, because at least for him, not for someone else, but for him in particular, working in the bank was not his calling. And that always kind of plays with my head a little bit. And I kind of wonder, again, without getting into the realm of having this thing that's so weighty you don't know what to do with it, because that's an uncomfortable place to be in, and I'm not sure we're meant to live like that. And we're talking about the emergent nature of purpose. So we're talking about this meandering journey that we go on.
It's movement. It's unfolding.
Yeah, it's unfolding, exactly. And I just often think about that. I just think, well, what happens if you don't? Like, what are you missing out on? And you mentioned the death of your father. Deaths are often points of recalibration for people, because they times of forced introspection when we review someone's life. And sometimes the person's lived a really remarkable life and it's really inspirational, and sometimes they've not lived a very remarkable life, but either way you kind of start questioning what you're doing with yours. And are you being true to those aspects of yourself that are core to who you are as a human? And those are some of the things that kind of pop up for me.
Yeah, I just found that it also just takes a lot of courage to do that. So while I might have been so moved by this tragic loss, I needed just an extra push, even with that, to then answer the question. So now what? And because I could at the time, I left formal employment, and that's when I started the Nomalanga tribe and my own gig, and just exploring this whole healing dynamic and how that can be an offering to the world. in a way that makes sense to me the best way possible. And it's not easy at all, but it leads us almost to the third point about purpose being something that also fuels your resilience and your motivation. So when you are going through challenges, which we often do, whether you're living in purpose or not, but when you feel that you are living in purpose and you go through certain challenges, once you go back to your why, it almost gives you a reason to persevere and to push on through the struggles and setbacks that you might have encountered, and you find yourself having, just this energy that you never knew it came from. Like what you mentioned in the beginning, it's like this life that's floating by, and then a purpose is thrown at it and it's animated, then there's energy and it has a certain course and there's destiny to it from a long-term perspective as well. And it can really, in a way, once that's clear, even start addressing some of the issues we have around burnout. And how to have this continuous source of energy and inspiration, even if you can't find it in your work, for example, and if you can't quit your work, what are the ways in which you can still infuse it in the small things that you still do every day, or that you can squeeze in to your life as well?
So I Viktor Frankl's book's popping up for me, Man's Search for Meaning. And just reflecting on his journey in the concentration camps. We're talking about burnout, which is a real epidemic here. Meaning literally kept him alive. It literally was the reason that he survived, finding meaning in his day-to-day. And for him, that was remembering his wife, I believe. I hope I'm getting the story right. But keeping that central. And you're talking about how having purpose gives you that resilience. For him, it was a lifeline. It was more than resilience.
Right.
So now how core is it to us?
Yeah. And in what ways, are we dying inside of ourselves and in need of this purpose to, revive ourselves? The little deaths around desires and dreams that you want for ourselves that we cannot let lie or never fully enlivened because we haven't connected to how we want to bring this purpose alive.
Absolutely.
Because the fourth element of purpose is that it becomes a transformational impact that creates a significant change in one's life. So yes, this might look like these big life changes, the example you made of someone that moved from banking to a different city and now doing music and that sort of thing. But even in the small ways in which you structure your day, for example, start looking a bit different. The words you start using start also looking a bit different, because you're more just intentional and conscious about where you want to send sort of your energy and influence, especially when you are a leader in one space or the other. When you're leading a household and you've developed or gathered this new insights around your purpose, that will transform your household and how you show up in that sort of space, let alone other spaces where we want to leave good legacies about our dedications and our enduring positive changes.
Yeah, and I like what you said. So, these two aspects that I'm, kind of hearing here. The one is the permeating nature of it.
Yeah.
So that it permeates your whole being. It's not just what you do, in your profession,
work,
which I'm seeing as number two, but maybe it's the same thing.
Yeah.
The idea is that you can live a very purposeful life, and it doesn't necessarily mean that your purpose has to be your profession.
Right.
So it's a much broader concept than that. And so, I know you've got some tips of how we can get really practical with this, but it's not necessarily your job, although it could be, and your job could be part of it, but it's not necessarily just your job.
Yes, yes. Because I see a lot of people struggling with that as well, trying to make it fit neatly and perfectly, or making it all about the profession when talking about purpose-led lives. And yeah, I don't think that's necessarily the case. We can definitely broaden.
I mean, we could do a whole podcast on that all alone. Like, you know, that's a whole thing all on its own. Should you love your job? Should your job be your purpose? Point is, it's a broader concept than that. It's a very much who you are thing.
Right. In fact, that leads us to our fifth point around how purpose is made practical, in that it has to align with your personal identity. So what you are aspiring towards achieving, what feels fulfilling to you, is also you making a meaningful just existence in life, with your authentic life, if I can put it that way. And a part of that is also around the consistency across life domains, as you say, that it's a way of being rather than what you do with your life, and in a way creates then harmony across the various aspects of your life, and coherence, possibly between your personal and professional realms, possibly, but not necessarily so. So that's definitely a point that we want to sort of drive home around the components of making purpose come alive in our lives. And I'll reiterate these 5 points. Number 1, it's an all-encompassing commitment. Number 2, it comes with purpose-driven leadership. Number 3, it influences our resilience and motivation. Number 4, it's a transformational impact and significant change. And number 5, it aligns with our personal identity. Right. So how do we then take the first tiny step towards doing this in our own lives and being intentional about it, right? And obviously with this podcast, we're really trying to give you, a sort of informed approach to some of these topics around thriving and well-being, but also just make it practical enough that after just listening to an episode, you can go try something out, and we can just keep building on these components of inner transformation as we go along. So one of the first things that comes up for me, particularly when I even just reflect on the conversation that we've had today, is how it's so important to write something down around purpose. So it first removes it from it being elusive when it's sort of written down and you can see it down on paper in different forms, right? As deep or as light as it can be, but something that you can sort of keep revisiting, tracking, and infuse in your lifestyle, if I can put it that way. And by then doing what we would like to share as a takeaway is then sort of how to organize your life so that it has purpose infused in it. And some suggestions here, we've given you 3 suggestions or templates that you can start using as you work through this, right? And this is something that you might edit along the way, you might scrap out completely and start again, you might think it looks like this, and as you are moving in your purpose, it starts looking a bit different. That doesn't matter, but what matters is that you keep writing something down, and it's something that you can just keep revisiting, right? So the first template we want to share is we can use the Ikigai. Is that how you say it? Ikigai.
I still don't know. It's good enough.
For the Japanese model, you'll find it also linked for download and available for you, where you start reflecting on what you enjoy doing versus what you're good at versus what you get paid to do. And in that way, you can start almost categorizing things that are fundamental to you and why we do certain things as well, right? And then the second level of writing something down, we can explore Simon Sinek's why statement, which is a purpose statement that can so almost encompass your purpose and how you can articulate it at a particular state in time. That can also change, as I know mine has changed a lot along the years. And basically, high level, you fill in the gaps between 2 and you insert the action or the effect that you want to have, followed by so that, and then you insert the effect that you want to then have. So, for example, to heal, so that we can start sharing powerful tools that can help others heal, for example. And then the third one, we can start also then using the Wheel of Life model, where it sort of segments your life into different life domains, and within those different life domains you can have specific targets or goals that you want to set, and these can be actual projects that you're doing and how often you want to do them and that sort of thing. That can also, you know, help with the jotting down of something related to our purposes and our reason for existence as we go along our lives. And we've attached those onto the podcast for you to just use and start off using. And I know though, Spencer, you have something that you've been trying out this year with regards to some of these things that we're talking about.
I mean, I've done an on and off, I suppose, over the years, and it's been really useful to me. And that is just using a habit tracker, which I'll talk to in a moment. The one thing I wanted to just add to your invitation to the listeners to write things down and to use the templates that we'll provide it's just the idea that just put something down on paper. I mean, you can change your mind straight away if you want to, you know, and you can scratch it out and write in your new idea or the new thing that comes to your head. But just put pen to paper. There's something about putting pen to paper that helps us to clarify and to process our thoughts. Yeah, and then on that, so for me, I've been playing with the habit tracker. And the idea is it's a little bit like the coaching flow, you know, within coaching. You kind of start with building awareness about what it is that you want to change. Mm-hmm. And then once you've got a good solid awareness of it, you work on things that you would call a practice. So what is it that you want to do differently and keep doing differently until that thing becomes a behavior and becomes part of who you are. And so for me, a habit tracker helps me to do that for two reasons. One is that I have to revisit the thing every day. So I have to think about it every day, because every day I'm looking at the piece of paper that says this is the behavior or this is the, you know, the action that I want to take.
Yeah.
Another reason is that I suppose it just compounds over time. So some people get caught up with the streaks of it, you know, try and get like a 10-day streak, which is cool and it shows progress. But for me, it's more about just revisiting that behavior, you know, or that thing you want to do over and over again. So that's a cool little tool that you don't need any help with. So you don't need anyone else to do, you know, to sit with you. You don't need coaching. You don't need therapy. You just need a pen, and you can do it on paper, or you can get an app and write down the behavior that you want to start to embody, and literally just start practicing that thing every single day. And don't worry so much about how well you do it or when you don't do it, but just keep going back to it on a daily basis.
Yeah. I thought that was cool, especially from a day-to-day sort of perspective, and breaking down the components of purpose from this big, daunting concept to something that, hey, okay, what are the habits that are leading to this purpose that I'm working towards, that is unfolding with me, for example. I know I use more of like a year, 2 year sort of approach, where I have this big flip chart, and I've used the wheel of life, wellness wheel of life, as the different areas that are important to me, and I add the projects that I'm working on, you know, practices that I'm like sort of also trying to embody, and those sort of things when it comes to my emotional life, when it comes to my social life, when it comes to the things that I'm wanting to cognitively learn or master, and that sort of thing as well. All of it stemming from this sort of high-level purpose statement that I keep revisiting as well.
Yeah, and at least two of those, you know, there's at least two elements that are in common, Joy, between your approach and mine. The one is that you're writing, you know, so you're putting pen to paper. And the other element is that you're revisiting. And again, you know, you never have to stick with something. If it doesn't sit well with you over time, you can change it. But the change really gets processed when you when you put pen to paper and you scratch out the thing that you no longer want or are, and you're writing something new.
Exactly. And I guess that's kind of what was on my mind in terms of sharing some key things around a purpose-led life, and to go back on our key takeaways. The word for the episode, or the term for the episode for me, is intentionality. And we'd like to also just put a Zulu translation, so we start also building our vocabulary when it comes to these topics with indigenous languages like isiZulu. Basically, in isiZulu, this means inhloso, intentionality, inhloso. So living a purpose-led life is about being more intentional with your micro as well as your macro decisions in your life. And it affects your life practically in terms of what your boundaries are, what motivates you, what's keeping you resilient and committed, and what kind of lifestyle you actually embody. So in a society where we can be so distracted by what's happening externally and feel so overwhelmed by it, I feel as if purposeful living is about going within and being guided by what's most sacred and fundamental to you, and that can offer us the anchor that we need to show up in society and in the world in a more meaningful way. So this episode is for people on a journey of purpose-led living, for beginners and those who want to deepen how they become the change they want to see in the world. So we've developed 3 worksheets to encourage you to then download these templates as just a starting point to start writing things down when it comes to your purpose. And if you like this episode, consider sharing it with a friend.
Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to HumanFuel Podcast. We hope you enjoyed this episode and got some value out of it. If you did, the best compliment that you can give us is to share the episode with a friend. You can also leave us a comment on YouTube or send us an email at humanfuelza@gmail.com. Your feedback helps us to create better content, so we would love to hear from you. Thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you in the next episode.